Welcome to the Position Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Capasso, and we're here to learn together. I'm on a personal research project to understand how elite performers in the sports, military, and the creative arts make successful transitions into their personal and professional lives beyond those early pursuits and endeavors. And I have a theory with the environment that someone chose or that chose them, and the position or role that someone played in that environment that they chose or that chose them, can provide the keys to understanding their best path forward. We're just getting started, and I'm excited to share these dynamic stories with you. Let's dive in. Well, it's so good to get together, have a
Yeah.
conversation. I feel like we've just known each other probably just a couple of weeks,
Mhm.
but immediately was blown away by your background, a lot of the life experience you had before getting into corporate world, business world, and now always my favorite people at every company I work for is the HR VPs and that
Yes.
team,
Yes.
because that is where the real conversation happens. That's where
Mhm.
people get taken care of in those conversations. And that's what I love about the work you're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to get into all of that and you sort of pre HR, people,
Yeah.
business, and post. But we started this trying to pick a good background for our conversation, and the butterfly stuck out to
Drawn
you.
to it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Tell me, what's the story of the butterflies?
I just love them. I think there's it's my connection with nature. I have them like tattooed all over, but I just think it as corny as it sounds, like the representation of what they stand for. Like they start as this like ugly thing. And they transform and they go through this like really rough process and they come out this beautiful creature with a purpose, right? Like they gotta pollinate and kind of add beauty to the world, and their lifespan is short, but I don't know, it's just a kind of transformational process that I've always thought was really beautiful, and just the symbol of it just always catches me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. And what a good metaphor for maybe a little bit of what
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about is some of that transformation journey.
Yeah.
And so when we get into that a little bit, tell me about how you got into the military. What inspired you? What sparked that motivation for you to take that step? Where were you in life? And what
Yeah.
kind of motivated you to do that?
Uh, it's so funny thinking of that person who joined the military as like a completely different person than I am today. But I was 18, 19 with just zero direction with what I was doing with myself. And thought it was the people I was surrounding myself with that was, kind of taking me down this, different path. And it was me. I was, it was all me and just the choices I was making. And it just wasn't, I needed something to get my act together and just to grow up. And I grew up in Northern California, close to the Bay Area, but still like a smaller town. And really the only avenue to get out was, through the military. I tried moving and came back a couple of times and just saw people joining and they were, off doing something great and learning new skills. And I thought, okay, I can do that. So just walked into a Navy recruiting office and just said, I'm signing up. Like, don't lie to me. Let's just do this. Get me out of here as fast as you can. Like, let's rock and roll. And we did. I think by the time I got into the office, signed up and left, it was like a 3-week time period. And I was off to boot camp in Chicago and just kind of never looked back from there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what attracted you to the military specifically? Because there might have been different ways of sort of finding your footing and kind of getting a little more grounded, let's say, if that's what you're trying to do. What about the military in particular attracted you to that environment?
Yeah, I did try school for a while and I was not
Okay.
ready. Like I went to a community college in Sacramento, just wasn't showing up to class. Like it just wasn't where I was supposed to be. I think it was there's something about the adventure in it, the unknown. It seems hard. It's crazy. There's routine and structure. I had none of that. Um, my mom kind of pushed me into it too, like saw me kind of going down a different path and said, hey, why don't you just join the military? And I thought, oh, I can't do that. That's too hard for me. And then I realized like, it's not, no, like I can do that. I started Googling it on like the big laptop, the desktop computers. And my grandpa was in the Navy. I had a grandpa in the Navy and a grandpa in the Marines. Loved them both. But my grandpa who was in the Navy, like his personality, like he always had like the funniest jokes, like the inappropriate jokes, and always laughed a lot, had the coolest stories.
That's amazing.
And I thought, okay, if I'm in the Navy, I'm on a ship, which means I'm near water and by a beach. And so my 19-year-old self thought, great, I'll always be by a beach. And so that was where I went with it, and it turned out great. And it was by a beach the whole time. I was in San Diego for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So it was good.
That's amazing. And what a amazing connection to kind of what you saw in your family, how that could keep you maybe close to home or that feeling
Yeah.
of home
Yeah.
while still pulling you far enough into the adventure
Yes,
and
exactly.
into the suck or the hard stuff,
Mhm.
to kind of work through. That's really amazing. So then do you get to choose specifically like what branch of the military you go into and what
Yeah,
job or activity you take? Yeah. How does that work?
you do.
Yeah. Okay. So how is that process of choosing that? Cause that can't be easy. So many options, I
Yeah,
would imagine.
there is.
Yeah.
So you pick a branch, right? They all have their own recruiting office, and you make the decision of like what branch you want to choose, and you go in and you have kind of like your intake sit down session, and they're salesmen, they're trying to sell you to get into it. Um, and at that point, you decide, okay, this is the branch I'm going to serve. Here's my ASVAB. You're going to take. It's the same ASVAB you take for any branch. So I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's your aptitude test. So you go through it and you take it, and depending on your score, you get a chart of how many eligibility like jobs you can pick from. What did this test tell you were going to be the most successful
Mm,
at? But you don't know what any of these jobs
super.
are. That's the thing.
Uh,
So I get this score that I was told was above average. I don't know if that was true, or if they were just being nice, but I did have a decent list of jobs available to me. But all of them had like a timeline, right? So it's all numbers in the military. We don't need this job until 6 months from now. So you have to wait. I just wanted to leave. I said, what job will I pick today where I can just go? I said, well, you can be a gas turbine electrical engineer and leave in 3 weeks, or you can be an aircraft mechanic and leave in 4. And I said, boom, gas turbine, let's do it. And I
wow.
went home and Googled what that was because I didn't know what a gas turbine was. And I thought, holy shit, like what am I getting myself into? This jet engine that I know nothing about. But they send you to school after boot camp and you learn all your stuff, and you just have to roll with it. You can't
Yeah.
think too much, I think. If you overthink it, you'll talk yourself out of it. I just said, okay, let's do this one and let's go. And I'll just take it from there.
Yeah. That's amazing. Do you find like today in life or, as you make decisions, would you make them the same way today as you made it then? Would you do anything differently looking back on it?
No, I think I'm the same. I think there's a level of risk you take in any decision you make, like life choice, and I think the biggest and most impactful ones are scary. So if you let it scare you, and you overthink it, I just feel like you don't do yourself, like you'll water it down, or it won't have the biggest impact. So I can be a little, I don't want to say spontaneous, or what's the word I'm looking for? Um I know it's escaping me, but I
Yeah.
can be a little spontaneous with that and just kind of go with it. I
It's
think life's too
spontaneous is
short.
a good word.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Although you had a strong intention of what
yeah.
you intended to do and what you wanted to get from the experience. So that was in the books,
Mhm.
right? And so now you just had to pick a time to go and
Yep.
what vein of the military to go into, which is probably the least risky of the whole decision. The whole decision is probably uprooting whatever you had going
Yes.
to decide that you wanted to change, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's the
Yeah.
initial going in. Once you sign that piece of paper that you're going to do it, you can't turn back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So once you sign that and it's over, like, okay, I'm smart enough. I'm capable. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to get out of here. And that's enough.
Yeah.
So you just kind of roll with it.
Yeah. So what were the first few days, few weeks, few months like? Like what was that like stepping into that environment?
The boot camp. Yeah. So my dad drove me. It was so funny. He's just just kind of this ride or die guy. And he's driving me to the San Jose airport in California. And I'm about to get on this plane with a bunch of other recruits to go to Chicago or Great Lakes, Illinois. And he's like more nervous than I am. He's like sweating, He's like, I swear if you wanted to change your mind, you want to go to Mexico right now, let's just leave. I'm like, no, Dad, like this is going to be good. This is a great experience. There was a lot of like emotion with my family. But I've always been super independent and on my own. So I was ready for this. And, you get off the plane, you get on this bus, and you have no idea what to expect. All you see is movies and you're hoping that that's not what it actually is. We get there, it's like late at night, and all I know is like they're throwing my duffel bag out of my hands and screaming at me, and we have to go in and sit down. And like the first few days were all just like this giant blur. You're getting uniforms, and all of a sudden they're chopping my hair off, and I'm wearing this ugly sweatsuit with like this Navy stamp on it, and you just don't know what's going on and you're exhausted. But then it settles in, you get into this, they build routine and structure, and you have the same day every single day for 8 weeks, and you're physically exhausted and mentally exhausted. And you kind of see, it was interesting, you see how people's like childhoods reflect them in that space, because you're all surrounded by the same environment, and how you adapt to it and how you respond to it really shows kind of how you were raised and some of your morals. I had strict parents. It was easy for me. I always had chores. I was always told what to do. I always had to earn my own money and things like that. So I didn't find it that particularly hard. But people struggled, and it was interesting to see, like, oh, not everyone's raised like me.
That's super interesting.
We all have our own path here.
It's like getting into a much more intense version of like elementary school
Yeah.
or middle
Yeah,
school with a
exactly.
new group of people.
Yeah. Like your parents never yelled at you. You're scared of this? Like what? Like my mom was Italian. She was mean, it's nothing. Telling me to clean toilets. I got that,
That's amazing. That is amazing. So then what about being a female going into that environment? Because I'd imagine that you're extremely outnumbered. And what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I was in, like they keep their boot camps separate. It's co-ed, like you've got like your female group here and your male group, and you're all the same kind of division or whatever they call it. So I was in the barracks of women. But then as you get to a ship is where you're represented evenly in boot camp, but you're not as you're dispersed at your command. So that was really interesting too. So I thought, we're all 50-50 here. There's equal amounts of both of us. You get to your first ship and I'm the only female in a department of 60 men and I'm one of 18 women on the ship. And you're like, wow, this is a whole lot different than I thought it was going to be. But, in boot camp, I think they do a good job at having more of a balanced, even like leadership representation. And I'm sure today it's probably different with how ships have balanced out like gender. And I know my last ship I was on was pretty equal, like 40% women and 60% men. But definitely back when I joined in 2006 through 2016, it was definitely not as equal. And watching that evolve was really interesting too, like how it changed and shift.
Yeah. Yeah. You even mentioned that there are some provisions around how you can groom yourself, how that's sort of received. How are those sort of dynamics?
Oh, yeah. There's a grooming standards manual that you have to read, and it tells you, how to wear your uniform properly as a woman, like what kind of makeup can I wear? How do I paint my nails? How long can my nails be? Like where do I wear my bun on my head? Like it's very, like even getting out of the military from that, like I can dress however I want and wear my hair however I want was a liberating thing. But I remember showing up to my first ship. I was 20, I guess, by the time I got there, and I'm like super excited. Like I'm jazzed to be there, smile on my face. And I'm the youngest of all, everyone in the division or department, and I'm the only female. So I show up, I got my little makeup on and my nails are done and my hair's nice and neat. And it wasn't my first day, but it was within my first probably month there. And, it's stressful. We've got things going on. And there was this older kind of superior who like looked me dead in the eye and said, like, go wash your fucking face. You're not here to look pretty, in front of all of my peers. And it was like, you could hear a pin drop. And I liked to think of myself as someone who would stand up for me and like, respectfully counter back, but you just like tail between your legs. You just go down to your berthing, like washed my face, showed back up, like humiliated, but you get back to work. And, it was a different culture then. Obviously that would just not fly today with, just the military's changed a lot in a good way. But, it's those little things you learn where you grow that thick skin, where you have to, okay, like I have to show up a different way to be taken seriously here. And it was, definitely a reflection of the male to female ratio. And those men on that ship, like they hadn't worked with women before. They see this 19-year-old kid who comes in that's trying to do their job. And I can imagine for them that was a big change also. They had to change the way that they showed up. But there was definitely a clashing of the worlds there for a bit.
Is there any part of that experience, or what part of that experience sticks with you now, even in the professional world? Like, because I could see that being pretty sticky, right? In terms of like, and obviously it's something that's a meaningful experience for you. How does it manifest or show up in how you operate today? Is there anything you do differently or anything you do as a result of that experience that informs any of your day to day?
Yeah, like being in HR, I think, that was ultimately a workplace. I mean, when you're in the military, you live and breathe and work all together, but that was a place of work. And I, back at that time, you're spending 10 to 12 hours a day with your coworkers, all towards this mission, towards this organization that you serve. You're ultimately compensated for it, but the least you should deserve from that is feeling valued and respected and being able to bring your whole true self to work and, accomplishing what you do. And so today, when it comes to as a business partner, one of my jobs is safeguarding that employee experience. And I feel like that is something that I'm super passionate about. Is we want an environment where everyone in their true selves can show up to work and feel welcome and invited and just as accepted as everyone else at the table. It doesn't matter if you are wearing makeup or you're wearing a dress or whatever it is. We're here for our minds and our skills and our competencies that we add to the ultimate, value of the company. And we're all treated as such equally. And that's something that, it's an extreme example what I shared, and that would never happen, hopefully, in a corporate job. Let me be the business partner in charge of that complaint that came to me. But even though it was an extreme example, I take that as, I reflected all towards that and how I felt in that that situation. Just because it wasn't as extreme over here in this example doesn't mean they didn't feel that same way. So I like to make sure that I honor that space for them too, if I feel there's any sort of imbalance.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, and it makes me think of, I've had scenarios as I've been in leadership, through some of these growth companies where I've had some people where I've had to raise the bar. And actually, there was an SDR on one of the teams that I think of at one of the companies who for a period of time, several weeks, would come in these like scrubby sweats and kind of like ripped t-shirts and like hair kind of flailing around, unkempt, And finally I had to say to him, I was like, his name was Ryan at the time, but you need to get yourself together. Like you need to get some clothes on, like you need to get your hair cut. Like this isn't going to work out well for you if you really want to grow in this organization, if you're going to show up like this.
Yeah.
This is a different version of that. So maybe there is a place for raising the bar.
Yeah.
But once you establish that standard of what's respectful in an environment, let's say, or, people can have their freedom to play all around that, I don't know, maybe that's the other end of that bar.
Oh, for sure. Well, in the grooming standards, there was a bar that had to at least show up professional, right? Like you represent the company that you're there with.
Yeah.
So for sure. And I feel like that's a coaching moment for me, right? Like you're especially as any sales role, you are the face of the company, and we don't want the face of the company to be unkept.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it? Get a haircut and get a real job.
Yeah.
Conversation,
Yeah.
Sometimes you need it.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's talk about being a gas turbine engineer, because that sounds like a really hard and very technical job that not just anybody could do. If you were to unpack, like, what would be the key characteristics of doing that job well? Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming you had probably other roles and other jobs that you played, over time in the military, but what's required to do that job well from just an overall, personal characteristics, mindset, so on?
That's a good question. Big time, like critical thinking skills. You have to be able to see the big picture and break down all of that into its small subcomponent parts and understand that this larger whole is made up by all of these individual components working together to make this happen. Like that's in any, like down to the circuit board I'd be working on, or the computer function, or the engine module itself, or its fuel system. All of it is one giant system working together, but small pieces. So you have to be able to critically think there. The troubleshooting skills, you have to problem solve. Sometimes your only symptom is that this engine's not starting and you have to go fix it. So you have to like kind of put your thinking cap on. You're there for days, like the tenacity and the patience of like going through the schematic one step at a time and knowing that you're probably going to fail like 15 times before you find any sort of like, wow, we're onto it. And a lot of it really too is, so you have to have some sort of I guess the electrical mechanical background and understanding like basic functions. My dad worked on cars growing up, so I was always like in the garage with him and stuff. So I thought that was always interesting. So it is really manual labor, but a lot of it really is just can you, and it sounds simple, but your attention span can't be like a goldfish. Like you've got to be on this sometimes for days, and being able to kind of walk through this complex schematic and being able to place this like in real life. I don't know how you would call that as a skill, but it doesn't sound like that would relate to HR, but I feel like a lot of that has helped me in seeing that bigger picture at an organization. It's made up of all of these different subcomponents and parts. They're all equally independent and operate on their own, but collectively together, we're here to do this bigger purpose. And as a business partner, I have to know all of those details to the business. Who does what and why? Is that efficient? If not, how else could we rearrange this and make this better? All towards that bigger outcome. So it's weird how something as interesting as me having a tool bag and a schematic and like a 4-head flashlight on, down here working in this engineering space, it is some of those same skills that you would apply to this desk job, in HR, and some of those same critical thinking skills.
Yeah. I could also see too, you might get into certain situations that, there may be an investigation going on at the company or a case that you're working on, or an employee who's dealing with an issue, where you've got to kind of stay on that issue for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get it to resolve. And maybe that's a way of thinking about some of that as well, as you've gotten into some of that problem solving.
Oh, for sure. And the patience with people's emotions.
Yeah.
Like it's some of the highest level of patience you have to have. even OD, like organizational development, was what I majored in all of my fancy degrees. And that is going in to fix, organizational problems and drive, increase of efficiency. And a lot of times your symptom is just this team's not producing anything, or no one likes to work on this team, or these numbers are down here. Like, go figure it out.
Yeah.
So you're almost you have that schematic mindset, like my tool bag, and I have to go figure out like, what is the actual root of the problem here? And then how do we fix it? So same kind of detective skills there too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you're using the language of we. How do we fix it? What do we need to do? And if I picture, because I don't know a lot about that domain, but if I picture your dad in the garage working on a car, or you, in coveralls with a light on your helmet, it could seem like a lot of solo work, but is it mostly solo, or is there a lot of work working with other engineers or other people around this?
I think that's probably, I always use the term we. I think that's a lot of my successes in the military. I hate saying this, it's cringeworthy, but I like the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals. I walked away with like 8 of them.
Wow.
Right. And it's not because I'm like this super fancy rock star. I just really was passionate about what I did. I found myself in really interesting situations that I just like went with it, and it was very successful. And, that was all me. But in the military, it's much greater than you, right? Like, you're serving something bigger than yourself. You might have put your hands on this and fixed this yourself, but you learned that through someone else at a different time. It's a lot more than just you. And I think you find the we coming more naturally in that environment. And in HR, if you're talking about me all the time, like, you're not going to be this trusted, kind of respected partner and advisor. So you kind of blend yourself into the background, and it doesn't matter how much was just me. What I like to even just impress and influence on my leaders is it is the aspect of we, right? Like, we kind of strip those egos, and we're here to serve the better organization for the whole of it, not just what I do on my own,
Yeah. What do you think holds back potentially leaders or managers from embracing that or doing that naturally? What have you seen?
I think there's, if I were to guess, because every leader is different and has different pasts and experiences that maybe ultimately led them to have, to have a difficulty with that. But I wonder too if we have enough, am I going to be recognized for it? Right? Like, we like recognition, and we like to be, praised when we did a good job, and we like others to know that we're doing well. That's why you praise in public and like reprimand in private, or whatever that rule is. But maybe there's a lack of trust. Will I get rewarded for it, or will they water it down and say it was a we thing? And ultimately, in corporate jobs, you are rewarded on your performance. And so money wise, I want to make sure that I get the credit for this. So it's, a part of my job is making sure, and it sounds small, but sometimes the feedback we get from employees is like, recognition sucks here. Like, I just get the pat on the back, and that's it, if even that. So how do you really tap into recognition programs and show employees, like, if you do the work, you're going to get the credit for it. We're going to see you for it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're rewarded for it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way you said that. Like, we're going to see you for it, because that seeing has to happen all the way throughout the organization for it to work.
Right.
Because if it stops at some level, if we stop seeing or aren't interested in seeing, then that chain is kind of broken, But if everyone knows that they're going to be seen and recognized and acknowledged for being more selfless, or giving away more of the credit, or operating with a more we mentality, they're more likely to do it. But if they're not seen for that, it's not what's being rewarded in a sense. And it makes me think of 2 things. We haven't talked about this, but I know we shared, as we were catching up here at the collective, some books that we've read and some different points of view. But I recently read David Brooks's book, How to Know a Person. I don't know if you know David Brooks.
No.
He's a New York Times columnist who's written several books. The Second Mountain is one of them, and a few others on leadership and growth. But How to Know a Person is really about, he's basically asserting that we could create a much more connected and healthy and peaceful world if we're willing to see other people more clearly, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a book about, why it's important, and ways that people can think about that. And I also relate that to somebody that I know well, that I've seen as a therapist, actually, who's talked to me a lot about the maturity of people over time, going from being seen to seeing. And it's sort of a sign of maturity when you make that. Like, you have kids and I have kids, and they're roughly in the same age. And it's like, mommy, look at me, watch this.
Yes.
Watch this, daddy, watch this. And that's great, because they're in a period where it's important for them to be seen. And then as we mature, and so sometimes I worry that that folks haven't maybe fully crossed that
Yes.
chasm into seeing people versus trying to be seen.
Mhm.
But I think what you're saying is an organization can help foster that or cultivate that
Yeah.
by encouraging seeing and acknowledging
Absolutely.
and recognizing all the way through those behaviors that we want, right?
Yep. 100%.
Not just the ones that we think we want, which is just performance,
Mhm.
right? And results. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even one of the best parts of my job that I always take very seriously is sometimes people just want the space to feel heard with, I mean, it doesn't matter if you can't fix any of it, right? A big, powerful space for, and being a business partner is like, I always have room, even if my calendar looks nasty, like I have room to sit and listen
Yeah.
to whatever it is you have to say. Can't promise like all these miracles, but there's a safe place to go bring all of your feedback. And I'm not going to just sit on it and like close it in a box. And like I'm syncing with all of your leaders and I'll plant this as it comes up, you know, with initiatives and priorities and things. And so that's a big piece of, you know, wanting to feel seen for what I do, but I also want to feel heard and that my voice has something of a weight here. And that at least someone's listening and considering my perspectives, even if it doesn't go to, you know, come to fruition or
Yeah.
something's not taken from it.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, if we go back now to a little bit of some of those characteristics that you described, sort of, you know, critical thinking and problem solving, some amount of like stick-to-itiveness, right? Your
Yeah.
ability to stay on a problem and stay focused and hone in on that problem, the ability to work with other people and understand the bigger picture and sort of like, you know, fly high and fly low, as some might say, or, you know, be able to zoom out and zoom in. I think that's super, super compelling. Was there
Yeah.
any, well, and there's also a amount of grittiness about the job. Like it's physically demanding
Big
as
time.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, big time. I remember just like this small random thing. Like we would have, you know, oh, you have parts, you know, on the pier or something, go pick them up and you have to go get your parts and then figure out where it goes to and go put it in. And it turned out that someone like years ago had ordered this brass valve. It's like a check valve. The thing's like 75 pounds. Like I had to go pick it up off the pier and like carry it down to this space and then install a 75-pound brass. I don't know if y'all have ever done that, but that is like really freaking hard. And like the level of exhaustion, like all I did that one day was change out a valve, but it was just like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't going to do that for any
Yeah.
longer than I had to.
Well, and I can imagine in the people business, it can be as much emotional exhaustion as physical. So how do you deal with that part of it in terms of emotionally having the weight of other people's problems or challenges or wants and needs?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
It's a good question. You know, the Navy was very much a physical job. And I feel like you almost compensated for that, you know, with some sort of like collaboration. And you have like, I think the camaraderie really helps like feed that back as a full circle and having some sort of outlet emotionally there. And I feel like it's the opposite for me here. You know, emotionally, my job is all heavy emotion stuff. It's helping advise, you know, or coach leaders on, you know, all people issues. It's hearing and giving feedback. ER and employee relations stuff is exhausting and just drains my like emotion tank completely. Social tank, like by the time sometimes my days are just calls and I'm talking all day and there's no thinking time. So I have to just shut that computer and shut my office doors and just sit for a second with no one talking to me. But the physical part of that becomes more important to me. Like I have to work out every day. If I'm not working out, I'm doing yoga or I'm in a dance studio. And if I don't have that balance there, because you have the physical and emotive kind of drivers there, I have to have that like in sync or I'm just a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
So that's what drove me here to the collective, is like having this space where I can work and work out and like the wellness and the saunas and the cold plunge and stuff. Like that's all kind of cyclical and it's like that kind of internal balance there.
Yeah. Well, in many ways, you're a model for that. So that's amazing, right? For the employees and what you just said earlier about what you want the employees to have access to and bringing to work. And so you're a model for it. And obviously they can see you living it. So they're more likely to, you know, follow that lead.
Yeah, for sure. No,
as a leader, I think that's really important that you do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's amazing. Well, then when we think about like this shift then from the military to civilian life, right? How did you get to that place where you knew it was time and you were ready for that change or shift?
Yeah. I got out after 10 years, but I knew probably after year 7 that wasn't going to be a lifetime thing for me. A lot of things feed into that too. It wasn't just the Navy, but you know, I knew that I wanted to be a mom, and being a mom, like out to sea with kids like that. So not something I never really wanted to deal with, but I finished my bachelor's while I was in just part-time tuition assistance programs is great. I got my bachelor's in psychology and that's what really sparked my like people kind of radar on like, oh, this, I didn't know what I wanted to do with that degree, but I knew that it had to do with working more with the people side of stuff and working smarter, not harder, like laborious sort of work. And I didn't even know what HR was like at the time. I knew that the Navy didn't have that and no one was really looking out for you except your manager. And if you had a bad one, that was a bad experience. So again, how do you create these good experiences that ultimately lead people to perform better when they feel valued or they feel like they're heard and respected and things like that? Even the direct impact of leadership, you see commanding officers cycle in and cycle out. A good leader has a major impact on every single individual in that organization. And you watch the same crew, react to what would be a not so great leader. And it's like night and day. So I took all of this and just kind of researched, like, this is obviously something I'm passionate about. I love this. Like, how do I work in this space? And somehow I just found out what HR was, human resources. I was like, oh my God, this is a job. Like, people do this, right? This is amazing. So how do I learn more about this? And I found it's industrial and organizational psychology at USC, the Dornsife School of Psychology. I think they call it applied psychology. And I applied for that master's program and thought, okay, if I get accepted into this, then that's kind of my sign that, I'm just going to go with it. And again, just like the Navy, just go do it and see where that takes me. And I did get accepted. I started that while I was in about a year left. So I just knew that, it was transition time. And so the 10 years, people call me crazy for getting out because you only have 10 more, right? You just have 10 more. It's like 10 years is 4 more deployments and it's just, craziness. So my heart wasn't in it anymore. Ultimately, I knew that, this passion kind of drew me to this other place. And, the military really is a temporary stepping stone for most of us. Sometimes it's 4 years, it's 10, or you do the whole 20, but ultimately it'll lead you to something else. And I just felt like at that time, that passion was calling me to something else. And once your heart's not in something anymore, you should take yourself out of it. Because at that point, like the Navy deserves someone who's going to show up fully for the Navy with that, right? And that just wasn't me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you were ready for the next phase.
Yeah.
And kudos to you for putting in some of that work along the way to facilitate that transition, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You got more education and did some of that research, but still not easy, right? Because you still have to take the step and find the path and do all of that. So how did you go through that? Because, a decade in the military, I'd imagine that becomes such a big part of your life, maybe a big part of how anybody would see you, right? Through that lens and not see you with a broader lens. And that can be good and bad, maybe in some ways, So I don't know, what was that transition like in that particular phase?
It was heavy.
Yeah.
To be honest, it probably took me years to fully go from like one to the other. And I think that, getting out is just as scary, if not scarier than joining. So, joining, they're going to conform you to whatever it is you're going to be doing. Getting out is the complete opposite. You're going from all of this, uniformity, and now you're this individual who can chart their own path. And that's super scary. So there's this big leap of faith you're taking in yourself when you get out and you have all of these grand, expectations because you've seen so many people be successful and they did this and this person did that and everything's going to be fine for me. But there really are a lot of periods where you question yourself. I mean, I knew getting out of the military, I was going to be a full-time student for a while. I just wanted to focus on school, travel a little bit, just kind of have some time, like a buffer in between and just kind of decompress. But I remember finishing school in January 2017, and I didn't find a job until April. And that was the longest 3 months of my life. And those 3 months were like, did I make the right decision here? Like, was I supposed to stay in and like be more successful here? And I just went against faith. You have all these crazy thoughts that come into your head. Am I good enough for this? Are they going to see me as good enough? So I got a little insecure for a while, like making the right choice for myself. But at the end of the day, I really had to tap into, my instincts, and like, I've never led myself astray, right? Like, I feel strongly about this. I'm passionate about it. It's something I want. The Navy didn't make me successful. Like, I found success in the Navy because of me. So I just had to stay true to myself and who I am and just like keep up that confidence and that faith in me. And ultimately, the job I did find, it was exactly what I needed at that time to really kind of spark my career and some personal things that had happened in my life. I got pregnant and had twins. And so that was, you realize that you have to have faith in that kind of broader energy aspect too, of like, what's ready for me will come. It might not be right away like someone else's experience. It might not be seamless like someone else's, but ultimately it's just as rewarding. And you just have to like, again, the tenacity and the patience, like stick with it. But it was hard.
Yeah. And were there other paths that you considered that wasn't maybe people business?
Yes. There were a lot of really fancy job offers to do exactly what I was doing in the Navy just as a contractor, like really
Yeah.
big price tags. And you're like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like you make how much money doing this exact same thing that I did in the military? Um, but again, like I had to stay focused. Like that wasn't making me happy. I wasn't passionate about it. Like don't get attracted to this shiny thing. And there was a period where I felt like maybe I didn't make the right choice and I had this bachelor's degree. Do I go back in as an officer, right? And be a commissioned officer? Again, like I took myself out of that because my heart wasn't in the Navy anymore. So you get distracted a bit, but I just had to I almost like created like a vision board for myself. Like, what is it that I want to see happen for me? Like, what do I have control over, either emotionally or like even, physically? And then how do I just stay on this track? I had to like kind of put the blinders on to make sure that I didn't lead off into a
Yeah.
different direction.
So what would be on that vision board in terms of maybe the conditions you were trying to set for yourself? Like what were some of the priorities there?
Yeah. At the time I was focused on money, which was not, uh, it's not where my head's at today. I don't know if maybe it's because I found kind of what that goal was, but at the time I knew that I wanted to have a certain income that allowed me to have this certain lifestyle. I wanted to travel. I wanted to have the flexibility to have a family and be able to be a mom that was at all the dance recitals and all the things and wasn't gone all the time. And I really wanted to find a space where, not to go off topic, but in the military, you do as a woman at the time, I had to show up much more masculine than, was my comfort area. You adapt and you become kind of what you need to do to, I say survive, but I don't mean that in a literal sense, but to be successful. I had this seat at the table with all of these men and I had to show up stronger to be taken as seriously, especially if I was going to challenge something or, go against what, everyone else was suggesting. So you become this really hard, like overly assertive, aggressive sort of person, like an armor that you wear. And I knew that a big part of that vision board for me was to be able to get back to like myself. I didn't really know what that self was, but I knew it wasn't that, right? It was softer. I wanted to get back into some of the hobbies that I didn't have time for in the military, and just kind of, I know it sounds silly, but like wearing a dress to work, right? Like having my hair down and like wearing makeup without standing out, things like that. So I knew that a big part of that vision board was finding what that self was, what my true persona is, and being able to balance like all the various life things that the military it strips from you. It's a big sacrifice.
Yeah.
Couldn't go to Christmases and Thanksgivings and things like that. So it was kind of all over the place. It was a big aspiration. So I thought, am I over wanting, am I looking for a unicorn? But I wasn't. I eventually found it, and still to this day, I absolutely love the space I'm in and feel super blessed to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's really interesting about what you described is anybody who's coming from a really intense period where they're dedicated to an environment that could be the military, it could be sports, it could be some creative arts, and you get really good at that thing, the environment of that thing, even if you're ready to transition out of that particular phase of that work or that experience, it could be easy to just latch on to the next closest thing, which in this case could have been some consulting work around that, but not really getting you any closer to more fulfillment or to next level of growth as a person, but safer and sort of tangential and closer. And I would imagine that that's, it actually happened to me because I, played college soccer at Notre Dame. I played professionally after I graduated, and then I got into coaching and I coached women's soccer at UT, right, for 5.5 years. And it was just the next logical thing to do. I was done playing. I'd had 2 major injuries back to back. And I felt like it was time, my body was giving up on me a little bit at that level. And so I got into coaching. Now I don't regret that at all. It was an incredible experience, but I did have a period about 5.5 years through that next step, just sort of like one step to the left and forward, where I was like, no, there's more here. Like I got to challenge myself in more ways. I can't just be in this box for my whole life because that's not going to be fully me. So I'm really glad to hear that you set that aside, because it would have been really easy, because it sounds like it would have checked a couple of the boxes on the vision board, essentially. Right?
For sure.
Yeah. So that's amazing.
And safe and logical, those are key, right? Like we seek comfort. When we are pushed outside of our comfort zone, like you get anxiety, it feels, stressful and it scares us. But what's logical and safe is not always like, it's okay to close something out and move on. You don't have to do something forever just because you're good at it.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, well, I know the Navy and I'm good at it. Maybe I should just stayed and done it.
Yeah.
But what made you good at it was your passion for it. Once your passion, it's okay that it dies or it shifts or it evolves. Like, it's okay to move on. I think once you accept that, it's okay to float for a bit and find what that next passion is. Like, don't be scared of that just because it feels uncomfortable. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you were giving advice to anybody, which I know you do, actually, you have conversations and you're a mentor with others in the military and spend a lot of time thinking about it. What advice do you find yourself most giving to them about that transition and what to think about or do in that phase?
Yeah. I feel like I do probably say some of the same things, but I think, everyone has different drivers for why they're getting out. And I think that I try to put myself in their shoes. And if there's something that I've experienced that's unique, to that driver, that I'll try to give that feedback. But at the end of the day, I think where I struggled the most was like that confidence. Like, am I second guessing myself? Should I be here in this space? Did I mess up? Was it the Navy that made me successful? It's almost self-doubt a bit. So I'm a people person. Like, I'm going to amp you up, right? Like, you are capable literally of anything. Like that growth mindset, Carol Dweck, that's one of my favorite books, right? Like, that book probably changed my life. It's on my reading list at USC. You are literally capable of anything. You just have to put in a lot of effort and you have to open yourself up to feedback from those around you that are really good at it, right? So I tried to look for mentors in that space, even if it was on LinkedIn, or what organization could I, try to become a part of and start conversations and get feedback. But it really was about just keeping your eye on that prize, whatever it is. Like, it's not out of reach for you. You are good enough for it. You just have to stay in faith with yourself and ultimately find what that next passion is, because passion is what drives that success. You being good at something, it's because you love doing that and it feels good. So if this doesn't feel good anymore, that's fine. Life's too short to just stay here forever because it's safe and comfortable. Like, go find what that next feel good thing is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really impactful what you're saying. Like, what comes to mind for me, if I'm sort of summarizing what I'm hearing, is there's this element of going inside and being introspective, right? And getting clear on your vision board for what you want to build or create or be, and what you can think about that. And there's a journey there, but that doesn't imply that you're closed, right? You also have to have a level of openness with that introspection. So you're going inside, but you're also going outside to make yourself open to what's available. And maybe you do that through mentors and people in those conversations, through maybe different events or environments you could show up to. And all with the idea, with that openness, you're more likely to stumble across the thing or find the thing. And maybe what in that other scenario we were describing, where someone might stay closer to, again, one step over to the left and up one step to where they are, they're probably just not going to be as open to the possibility. And maybe that comes from a lack of confidence, like you're saying, right?
That's true.
And you're saying, hey, you can be more than you think even you can be. And, I think about this as I've talked to professional athletes as well. A lot of them, and there was a period where I felt this way too. You sort of feel like when that period of your life is over, like life is over.
Yeah.
What else is there to do? Like, that's the biggest thing I've ever wanted to do. Like, how could anything be bigger or more important? So then you're sort of in this mindset, well, what am I going to need to settle on after being on such a big mission?
Yeah.
And I, somebody who is here at the collective, I think said it best is, that your life is not over, that life is over.
Yes.
And so, so maybe it's a little bit of that, putting that in a box, knowing that that's over and then being open to the next thing. I think
that's a chapter in your book, right?
Yeah.
And the military too, I think, is very unique in introspection is a scary place, right? Especially when you are a part of an organization that stripped all your individuality away and have made you one of so many thousands of people, and you're all the same. You're treated the same, you're paid the same, you are one of X amount of people. So you don't feel that sense of individuality in the military. And that was an awesome journey for me. I'm very spiritual and like woo-wee, and like I meditate and I do yoga and I love my crystals and all, whatever shit brings you energy, right? But you have to find who that person is. And sometimes it's really scary when you look inside and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at here. Like, I've been told to look a certain way and act a certain way for so long that's actually the biggest, most funnest part of the process, is finding out who that person is. So like, dive into that, like, let yourself be scared a bit, but then discover who that person is by trying new things, right? Like, maybe it's taking a new class, or it's meeting new people, or it's going to a meetup group to do this, and you network with these people and you find this, it's such an organic process. And But opening yourself up to that can be super scary because there's fear of like rejection and not being good enough and not liking what you see. But that journey for me was probably the most beautiful. And I think that that's something that I continue to, I mean, even 8 years later after the military, I'm still on that. Like, who am I piece and what's my new vision board? And how am I still showing up a better version than yesterday and things like that. And it really is all about you now. You can do whatever you want. And that's a scary place too.
Yeah. Well, we started the conversation and you mentioned, I'm curious the role of learning in this and what you're
Hmm.
describing. And you started mentioning that, let's say college at the time or higher education, let's say,
Yeah.
wasn't for you before you got in the military.
Yeah.
And then as you were exiting the military, you were, very focused on doubling down in that, obviously. And
Hmm.
you've got 4+ degrees, right? And all in a domain that's, very serious at the end of the day. It's deep, right? In terms of
Yeah.
understanding people and organizations. So what role do you think education can have in all of this uh, as part of that process?
Yes. And that's so unique too. I mean, I think we get blinded today in like college is the only option to be successful. You've got to get a degree, you've got to sit in a desk job and do whatever. And that's true for some of us, but at the time when I was in that community college, American River Community College, I'll never forget it. I just didn't know what I wanted. So what was this all in purpose of? Like, this isn't serving anything today. I don't know what that end goal is. I'm just shooting in the dark here. So it didn't feel like what I was working on really was going towards anything substantial. I had to really grow up first for a while and figure out what is it that I want to do with myself? And does education serve that? And if it doesn't, that's fine. Something else probably will. But at that point, I was excited to go take these classes and every class I took like related to my job. And so that just like fueled me like, oh my gosh, like I'm this giant nerd now. I'm just absorbing all this information. I can still say that what I do as a business partner reflects a lot of the theories and like coursework that I went through and I still apply it to this day. But it might not have anything to do with what your passion is. Or maybe it's like going off on a retreat for 2 months and following monks around and learning how they live. And if that's what it is and that's your schooling, then go do that. That might be your education. But I think there's this misconception that you have to go back to college to be successful. But I mean, have you hired a plumber and like found out what that cost is and like
Yeah.
trade schools and like working with your hands? Like there's no shame in that too. But it's again like staying true to who you are and what you need. Maybe school is exactly what you should be doing, and maybe theory is important to your job. But if it's
Yeah.
not, don't waste your time, or
Yeah.
money.
Do you have a personal set of like core values or things that you've written down that, without getting too structured or hokey about it, are there any values that come to mind that you try to hold true?
Oh, for sure. I do these leadership exercises actually at work where we have core value cards and I have them identify their core values and we reflect them as leaders. But I had to do that for myself. And I think one of my number one values is authenticity. So it's really showing up as the true, genuine version of myself. I mean what I say what I mean. I don't have time for like the fakeness, like life's too short for that. Loyalty is big for me too. Like I keep my circle small. I think the military kind of fostered a lot of that too. You really were loyal to each other and you created this little family. And um, I like people who are in my circle to know that I show up for them, and I expect that in return. And spirituality is big for me, and that can accumulate a lot of different things. But spirituality for me is kind of like your outlet and your energy and where you put it and what you do with it. And I think that there's something really almost childlike in that as well, like just kind of being genuinely happy and just finding joy in life is important. Like life is very serious all the time. Like being a parent's super serious, work is serious. Like where can you find a reprieve from that? And spirituality for me is a part of that too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think, and you didn't say this out loud, but in hearing you talk and describe your journey, so much of it seems to also be around learning and growth.
Hmm.
It sounds like you're always open to growing and sort of shedding what is holding you back potentially, or what you
Yeah.
need to shed to get to the next thing. And so, I think that's really compelling as well. And maybe it's worth, everybody going through a transition at any time, but especially when there's some major life one like you went through, to maybe sit down and really think about those.
Hmm.
Because as you create that vision board for what you want it to be in alignment with
Yes.
something.
Yeah,
And
for
and
sure.
I'm sure that's where a lot of that came from. And then over time, those might shift a little bit, maybe with family or other
Yeah.
responsibilities, right? Perhaps.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
so what do you think from the military? Like, what is the biggest thing you had to unlearn to be successful in what you're doing today? Like, if you were to, there's so many skills that you learned and gained,
Yeah.
and even experiences you had. You mentioned the impact of loyalty in that environment and how it's impacted how you are in your professional life beyond that. But what did you have to unlearn the most?
The most obvious to that, and I had a hard time with this,
Yeah.
it's the intensity and the speed and scale at which you're operating all the time. It is actually exhausting, and you don't realize it when you have to show up like that every day. But I remember being blown away with how slow everyone operated within my first like corporate job. And if you gave me an assignment, I can have it to you by today and it'll be done well,
Yeah.
exactly what you're asking for. But now I have like weeks to get this done. Like, why do I need weeks to do this? Oh, because you want me to collaborate with people. And that's not their top priority to help you collaborate with your piece. And the slowdown and scaling that back was really hard for me. It even physically felt weird. Going from, again, picking up 75-pound brass valves to like sitting at a desk all day and like, what is this like? But I think the intensity at which people operated was mind-blowing for me. And there's a sense, I think, in the military of, I don't say this in a bad way, but you almost have to be a little arrogant, right? Like your confidence, you are put into some really crazy situations and you have to perform and you have one shot at it. There's a level of arrogance that you get about yourself, this really high level of confidence that does not serve you in that world. So you have to really like eat that slice of humble pie and know that, going from a pretty high level of leadership after 10 years to like starting over and making this hourly wage was really hard for me to swallow. And deep down, I just wanted to scream like, do you people know what I'm capable of? Right. But they don't give a shit. Right. This is a completely different world. And just because I showed up in that space successfully over time doesn't mean I'm going to be a shoo in here. I have to learn their world too. So I had to take a step back and observe and learn from them. Like, what does this look like? And then how do I find my place in it that feels natural? So instead of going in and like bulldozing and knocking things down, I had to slow down, take a step back, watch, learn, listen. It was a whole new sort of vocabulary that you learn too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about, I've heard lots of folks describe this in terms of like, and I've thought about it in terms of like meditation. There's a mantra
Mhm.
sort of begin again and begin
Yeah.
again. A lot of times in life, you may need to begin again, right?
Mhm.
It's like, this thing went down a path and you've got to pull it in and begin again. But the other way I've heard it described is sort of like being willing to go back and be a white belt or being willing to go back and be an apprentice. Like that humility you talked about is this willingness to say, I know I've achieved all this over here, but actually I need to draw the humility I can to know
Yeah.
that there's a lot I don't know, a lot I need to learn and need to know. And maybe that could be a thing that could hold somebody back, right? If you're trying to move too hard, too fast. I mean, I thought of this when I transitioned out of coaching. I
Mhm.
transitioned into essentially I ran a nonprofit for a year and I spent a stint in financial services because I had a finance background. I thought,
Yeah,
oh, this will, I'll get out of coaching and I'll put this finance background to work.
for sure.
In the end, neither of those really was what I wanted to do. But when I found technology startups and growth companies, I got totally excited. But
Mm.
they wanted me to come in as a SDR, and I'd been executive director of a nonprofit, and
Right.
I'd been a coach at a high level at what essentially is like
Yeah.
a Fortune
You're like,
500
"Who,
company.
me?" Right?
And I was like, I don't
Yeah.
want to go in as an SDR.
Yeah.
But I was like, I'll do whatever I need to do to get into this environment because I, like you said, know what I'm capable of.
Mhm.
I know what I've done before and I know that's in me. It's not just that environment that
Right.
had it,
Yep.
but you have to bet on yourself in that
Yes.
way. And I could see if you're not willing to do that, that could really hold you back because, it might make it harder for people to, to bring you along
Mhm.
essentially. Right.
And like
Yeah.
deep down, you are kind of bored for a while.
Yeah.
So you're like, I can do so much more
Yeah.
than this.
Yeah.
But it's not about that, right?
Yeah.
You've got to like get in to fit in. And you
Yeah.
know that because I was successful in this environment, I know I'll be even more successful here. It's just time.
Yeah.
And we get impatient and it's hard to start over.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So you've also said that, you want to spend more time helping folks through this transition. What's your vision for how to do that? Where do you think there might be an opportunity to provide the most help or support? What's on your mind around that?
Yeah. I've thought about this in so many different directions too. And I think, how can I use what I'm doing today, to influence that? So, part of what I do in human resources is like fit and like resumes and talking more about like what makes a good fit in a corporate job and how do you go from the Navy's core values to understanding an organization's core values, because we have core values too and there's principles that drive behaviors, and how do you learn to unlearn or change your language from this but it's relevant to here. And you have to learn how to kind of translate that in a way that this corporate job understands that you are a good fit. So how do I help to kind of lessen the discomfort in that? I would love to do more of that. I mean, even just kind of being in person with like interview preps and how do you show up? I remember going to like, I don't know, Nordstrom, and I bought like pantsuits and shit that, like I never wore again, like so unnecessary. So what does it actually look like to have a corporate job? I think I donated them like 2 years later, but like physically, I didn't know what it looked like. I was scared to show my tattoos. Like I had like I was sweating like in long sleeves every day. So if I can help to just even make it less scary and, like I am someone who would be hiring vets and here's what I would be looking for. I actually really want to go back and finish my PhD in organizational development. And part of my thesis was going to be what it means to hire a veteran and helping to do some research there on, something that a talent team could read and understand, transitioning vet, here are the skills you're going to get, but here are some things that, we don't learn that's important that maybe you can have development opportunities or like onboarding programs or something like that are designed for transitioning vets that help them get into those skills that maybe they didn't need in the Navy or the Marines that they need here at this corporate job. So I'm all over the place with it. I think I just need to find kind of where I would be most impactful and what is the biggest need today. And getting back into that community has been a big list or a big thing on my priority list.
Well, the title of this podcast is Position. And part of that is trying to understand and unpack the environments that people spend a lot of time at some elite level in, and then the position or role they play in those environments and how that environment and those characteristics of that environment and the environment within the role someone plays might inform where they'll be most successful, post that life. But position can also imply how you position what you do. And I think a little bit of what you were talking about is how does someone tell the story if they're to a potential employer or to somebody who they might want to partner with and get involved in something that they're doing around their background and how it fits. And I'm curious, like, is there anything that comes to mind for you around how you think about, especially coming out of the military, how it can be positioned to you as a hiring manager or to you as someone who's helping evaluate people coming in? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of, when you ask like traits and things that you've learned and things you had to unlearn that made you successful in the military, I mean, there can be a catalog of things. We know that other organizations know that a vet is going to be a strong hire because of X, right? They're going to be flexible and adaptable and they're going to be on time. They know how to, I know this isn't always a big thing, but they know what a chain of command is like, and they know what it's like to have to disagree and commit to whatever it is that we just came out from. So there are these really giant skills. And I think that a lot of that gets drowned out by, oh, but they were in a different space. Like they were working on gas turbines or they were doing this over here and we need someone to do this here. So I think it could take someone on the inside to kind of point out like, hey, there might be some on the job training, but if there's anyone who's going to learn fast, like the fastest here, it's going to be someone who was in the military, who literally had to habitually go through those cycles where you have this really quick learning stint and then you have to just go perform and perform well. And it was an expectation and they know that and understand that. So maybe there's some way that you can kind of be that insider, and it's got to be a formal program. And even like with SkillsBridge, I hear a lot about that and how companies don't take advantage of SkillsBridge, and the military will sponsor you to come pay. They'll pay you your normal wage to come, for 6 months to do this job in between your transition or retirement. And it's all about maximizing that time to get some sort of resume going. And that would be the perfect time to start connecting those dots there.
Yeah. So the ground we've covered is a little bit of, trying to, as you're making that transition, trying to tune and find your identity, your authentic self, kind of post that, right? Because as much as that environment shaped you, it is not you, right? And you want to find, the true you out of that to go to the next level. And we talked about, getting clear on your intentions, kind of vision board, like what is it you want to accomplish? What are the values around that are important to you? And then ultimately, you mentioned a lot about potentially having mentors, conversations, because a lot of times those mentors can become the people that pull you up
For sure.
and pull you with them, right? If they can get to know you. But it strikes me that all of that ground we covered that you outlined is a really good starting point. Because if you are going to position that experience, part of it is positioning the skills and the characteristics and the qualities you gain from that environment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what a lot of hiring managers want to know is, where are you going?
Yeah.
What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And someone who can't articulate that is not a very inspiring candidate.
Exactly.
You know, I've had a lot of employees that I've had to mentor over time. And I find in some cases giving them the advice that it's really hard to help them if they don't know what they want.
Yep.
You know, now I can help tease that out in them,
Yeah.
but they've got to get clear on that. Otherwise it's really hard to know how to help.
Yes.
Right.
That's that
Yeah.
introspection, that cocoon
Yeah.
period, right? It feels
Yeah.
like you're stagnant and you're doing nothing, just looking inside, but you have to come out ready for that purpose. Like if
Yeah.
you can't nail that down, you know, what is it that I'm here to do? And am I excited about it? No, you're not. That's kind of
Yeah.
where you're going to find that disconnect.
Well, that's amazing. Well, look, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful that you found the military, because however you described that little zone you were in before the military, looks like that was an incredible launching pad for you
Sure.
to bring your gifts into the world. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you. It was fun being here. I'm glad I got to share my story.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please review and follow this podcast on all your favorite platforms. And if you want to continue the conversation one-on-one, feel free to reach out direct. You can find my information in the show notes. And we want to share your story. So if you're passionate about helping others through transitions to find their center and find their best path forward, feel free to reach out and let me know.